Always one of the big highlights of our college football content each and every week here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, is to get these three together. And I just kick back and listen and learn, talking Ohio State football with much to discuss on this Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So get set for a good hour of Buckeye and Big Ten talk. From the top of the screen, we got Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop. We've got Buckeye Groves, Kevin Noon there in the middle, and of course, Steve Hellwagon, senior Big Ten writer at 247 Sports. Bucknuts, how are we doing today, gentlemen? We know that the travel plans have changed for all of you. We do know that.
Yep, no doubt.
A little.
I'll have some flight credit with American coming up here soon.
Good to see everyone. A lot of really good anticipated football games for the Big Ten and nationally taken off the board, of course. The Big Ten announced yesterday that it will not be playing out of conference games, strictly a conference schedule. And I don't know, gentlemen, I know that the talk was that the Big Ten would expand from 9 conference games to 10. I don't know if that's official yet. Kevin, why don't we start with you in regards to what was discussed on the call? I heard the news, instantly went live, talked for 2 hours, but you guys were right there to get the direct word.
Yeah, we don't know what the length of the season is going to be. Gene Smith spoke with local media, and some national guys got on the call as well shortly after the news came out. It sounds like we're a week plus out from maybe having some more details. 10 seems to be the number that they like in terms of what a regular season would be, but that doesn't even necessarily mean that we would see 10 games scheduled out at first. We may see 5 or 6, and then games would be held in reserve or whatnot and added on. And I think there's a misconception floating around out there too, that this loss of the non-conference means that the Big Ten would push back its start into October. That's not the case. Week 1, Labor Day, September 5th, being the Saturday, is on the table. Week 0, the week before that, could essentially be on the table. So we could be looking at 14 weeks or something to try and get 10 games in. And, I don't want to take all of the pieces of this and say it right now. I'll share some of it there too. But flexibility is a word that Gene used a lot. Just because a game, Ohio State, Illinois, is scheduled for Champaign, if Champaign, Illinois suddenly turns into a hotspot, that game could come flying back. So he was quick to say that there might be some competitive equity issues there that people are just going to have to kind of get over. And as I told a lot of our members over at Buckeye Grove, while this isn't all football, some football is better than no football. We still have to cross this finish line and get there. It's not going to be the type of season we're used to seeing in terms of what the look is going to be. But, I'm as hopeful as anybody that we will get to see this 10-game season.
Tony, before you jump on this, I started taking calls as soon as it was released, had basically no information, and people are concerned about college football playoff and equity across the board. I said, we don't have equity anyway. We don't have a system that's equitable anyway. We have a bunch of people selecting who's going to play in the invitational. Plus, we don't have equitable amount of games across the board in regards to conference play anyway. Whatever football we can get that we can put together in some reasonable fashion to determine championships would be great. Tony, your thoughts?
Well, the playoffs in the postseason were the furthest thing from Gene Smith's mind yesterday. And listening to him, the tone was, and you sort of adopted his tone. You're not even concerned about Indianapolis or the playoffs, because he mentioned the last time he talked to us in May or whatever, he was cautiously optimistic the season would be fine. He's no longer cautiously optimistic. I wouldn't say he's pessimistic, but he's definitely concerned. And so as you're listening to him, you're not even thinking about the playoffs. You're not even thinking about the postseason. And he said they'll talk about it next week. They'll figure out a championship plan of some sort for the Big Ten. Because who knows? There may be no divisions. We don't know. I know ESPN was saying that they'll try to front load division games. They're still talking about that. They may. But 14 weeks, 10 games, conceivably, you could schedule 2 games starting week 0, a bye week, 2 games and then a bye week, 2 games and then a bye week. I don't think they would do that for everybody because then you'd have weeks with no games conceivably, but you could stagger teams if you want. And now the thing is, if they start week 0, they're going to lose. So they've already lost some time because the week 0 teams are already working out now. But I don't think it's a huge issue to lose 3 or 4 days of workouts and then move them to week 0 anyway. So it could be, we could be seeing Big Ten football here in August and then all the way through into December. So it's a lot of people look at it as a step away from football, but this for me was a step towards Big Ten football.
Waiting for me to make an announcement about this. I agree. I think that the next step is to cancel and abolish the season, or the nuclear option of trying to play in February, March, and April, I guess. I don't know, but which I find to be unrealistic just from the standpoint of why would somebody like Justin Fields, who's going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, risk an injury so close to the draft? And it'd be like these guys that have skipped these bowl games here in recent years that aren't playoff games because they didn't want to hurt their draft stocks. So to me, I agree. If this is what it is, it's better than nothing. And I said this a long time ago, that whatever preconceived notions we've had about what makes a football season, I've been alive since 1968. Anything I've thought about college football from 1975, when I was aware of it, until today, is out the window. I mean, they are in completely uncharted territory, just trying to put people on the field. And I think 2 monetary things kind of come to mind. First of all, they've abolished the bye games, which Ohio State was going to pay about $2.6 million or thereabouts for Buffalo and Bowling Green combined, maybe a little bit more, 2.8 maybe. So, and if they weren't going to have even 30, 40, 50,000 people in the stands, they were going to lose their shirt on those 2 games. So particularly if nobody could come, I mean, that's just a complete $3 million you've just taken and flushed down the toilet. So that made complete sense that those were the first games that they abolished. And at the same time, they've protected most of their television contract. I mean, they don't have those non-conference games, which account for, what would it be? I guess 1/4 of the inventory. But to me, I think it's probably not quite that many, because you have the road games that aren't part of your package. So maybe 20% of your television inventory is gone, but you still have the meat and potatoes of that, which is the conference season. So Big Ten Network, ESPN, ABC, Fox Sports 1, all their partners can be made relatively whole still, and they can still bring in that money, because the thing no one's talked about is if there's no season. And I hear Gene Smith talking about how they would live up to their obligations to student athletes and to coaches, that no one was going to get fired or take a pay cut or whatever. Well, what's not being said is if the university, the athletic department, doesn't bring the money in, then that money has to come from the university, because it's more than the athletic department has in its reserves. And that's the same thing for Ball State, Indiana, whoever it is. The universities are going to have to underwrite some of this, and that's the last thing they want to do, because in a pandemic, are you picking toys out of the toy section type thing? So I don't know, just some general thoughts there. But to me, I consider this, like Tony said, a positive, that they're trying like heck to maintain some semblance of a season.
Go ahead, Tony.
I know some people were thinking this was a safety issue in terms of why is it safer for Ohio State to play Nebraska than to play Bowling Green, when Bowling Green is 2 hours north, hour and a half north. And Gene reiterated it. It's not a safety issue because he trusts that those teams would all follow their own protocols. It was all flexibility and keeping everything in-house, because it's a lot easier to shift to home and home to shift a game from Nebraska to Ohio State or Ohio State to Nebraska, then dealing with every other conference that the Big Ten schedule is attached to, or moving games from September 5th to October 24th. You can't do that with all of these other conferences involved, or if you might be able to, but it's just easier if you don't. And then, as Steve said, you can't afford those games if there's no fans in the stands, really.
So you don't think any of this has to do with, we know how we're going to house our players, travel our players, test our players, and we can tell our 14 schools this is what we want. We can all be on the same page, and we don't know what Bowling Green's going to do or the MAC's going to do.
Well, there's something to be said too about systems in place. You know where you're staying when you go to East Lansing. You do that every other year, and even when you do in the other division, you go to the West. I mean, you're still in theory going there at least once every 6 years. You know what's going on. You know those locker rooms. Systems and protocols are very important. But yeah, I think you're going to see a point to where the Big Ten really wants to have its own bubble, so to speak, and handle its own testing and things like that. I mean, again, the way that college football is set up is different than every other sport in terms of it being, each conference is kind of autonomous to a certain extent. And I think that the Big Ten just wants to tighten the reins a little bit by keeping it within its own group of 14 member schools instead of, this isn't about, even if Ohio State had to go to BG, which is not going to happen. But if that's only a 2-hour bus ride, but that's strange hotels, that's strange, transportation or whatnot. It's just easier to go with what in these uncertain times.
And I think what I'll just throw in there is the Big Ten schools are partners, whereas Ohio State's not a partner with Oregon. They just have a contract to play each other this year or next year. Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State, they're all joined at the hip and have been for decades and will be for decades going forward. So they share protocols, they share revenue, they share everything. They work together in lockstep. There's not a Michigan way of doing things and an Ohio State way of doing things. There is a Big Ten way of doing things. And when the presidents of the Big Ten again, I haven't listened to much of what Warren or Gene Smith said, if this was initiated by the presidents or strictly by Kevin Warren and his people in Chicago. But when they come out, they are a united front. There is no dissension within the ranks on this. They have a united front, and I think that's what makes this a little cleaner, so to speak, for it to just be a Big Ten season.
I've been completely misguided for about 15 years then. Ohio State doesn't have a certain way of doing things, and Michigan a certain way of doing. Maybe Michigan should start doing things.
Well, you know what I mean. Presentation of the sport is more what I mean, as opposed to the way they're playing football.
Absolutely.
I don't want to open my mouth and hurt my foot. But
Kevin and Tony in particular touched upon something out of the gate in regards to the scheduling approach, because I think the assumption out of the gate was, well, they've already played 9 games on the schedule. It's all set. And they're going to add possibly a 10th game to play a 10-game season. They're just going to pick and choose and say, okay, let's add Illinois to Ohio State's schedule, et cetera, and go on down the line. And let's see what the strategy is going to be. Is they're going to make that more of a proximity game geographically for safety conditions, or maybe the Big Ten's going to try to puff up its better teams or whatever. But you guys are talking about just almost tearing apart the schedule and reworking the whole thing.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, you can't just sit there and port the 9 games and spread them out and just throw another game in there. There's going to have to be, do we see a front loading of divisional games if we have divisions, which, I still think potentially they do, but, we don't know. It's all speculation. Now, do you front load that in case you only get to 6, in case, whatever happens at that point? Could you see Ohio State and Michigan in September? I mean, there are a lot of crazy things that could happen in terms of bucking tradition. But in order, would you be willing to see the game in September to ensure having an edition of the game this year? Or do you roll the dice and try and take it as close as you can to November? Because one thing I'm pretty sure about is we're not going to have games on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Because if we remain with the protocols that are in place for all these schools to go to distance learning after Thanksgiving break, I don't know why or how you play games on campuses on that Saturday at that point. So I would assume that they would probably try to end the regular season the previous Saturday. I mean, just, even if it's just an optics thing.
I'll throw in, I see a comment, not even 1% of the population has coronavirus. Here's the thing. It's so bad at Ohio State, they're not working out anymore. It's so bad at Clemson that 37 people have tested positive. You can't put a football team on the field with 37 people not there. So you got to get out of this mindset that, it's not a serious thing. It's not a real thing. Bull, bull, bull. It is a real thing. As much as we hate to say it, it's a real thing. And you can't put a football team on the field when 15 of them or 20 of them aren't there.
Take 100. Yeah, take 105 football players and then all the personnel, the coaches, everybody else, the medical staff involved. You're talking 200 people. You're just going to go with averages. 2 of them are going to have coronavirus. And then you're going to have, we always think, okay, they're 18 to 22-year-olds. They're healthy. They're good. Well, first of all, yes, that's generally the conclusion, but I don't think anyone wants to put guidelines in place saying 98% of them are going to be fine. Then on top of that, they have to deal with coaches and other staff and personnel that are 55, 65, 70 years old.
Yeah.
Serious issue.
In Clemson, by having 37 test positive, I am not saying that all 37 still have it. That could be a cumulative number over a number of weeks. But when Ohio State comes out and says it's so bad right now that we have to pause what we're doing to prevent any further spread, that's serious. That's serious. That means you can't put a team on. If they're not practicing, you can't play a game. So it's a serious matter.
And it's one thing when the IP
is Series 4 or is Series 12? I mean, Ohio State has been ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff. And serious to Ohio State may be meh to some other school. And I'm not going to attach another school to it because that's not fair. But, I think that Ohio State has just been so far ahead of things. The university's not putting numbers out. They somehow think we're going to super sleuth them into the point of figuring out, 7, and that's, that's an odd number. So that means, oh my God, Justin Fields, we're not good. We're not that good. Well, I'm not that good. But the point being is I've been told it's not Clemson levels or LSU levels or UNC levels or anything there. I don't know. I have tried so hard on my appearances on here not to get too far down the rabbit hole on my thoughts on the severity of COVID and everything else. But I think the pause is a good chance to go in, clean the building again, reassess your policies, recenter everything, and move forward. It's better now than in 3 weeks.
Gene Smith was asked, so what's the number of players? Like, what is the threshold of positive tests before things get shut down or before you decide to push a game off? And said they will have to come up with that number, and that will be a medical decision. And that's also another reason why you want to stay enclosed in the Big Ten, because your number, you may like your number, you may not like the max number. And the max number may be as long as fewer than 20 players, then we'll still come to town. Whereas Ohio State's like, whoa, we don't need you in Columbus right now, buddy. So they'll figure out what that number is and then move from there. And the fact that they are trying to come up with the number continues to reiterate that they are going to try to play this season. And that's the one thing we have to keep in mind, that they are trying to make this happen. I saw somebody ask, when will we know the schedule? Gene Smith said, hopefully it has to be next week, because workouts are slated to start for everybody next week. The mandatory workouts start on Monday. And if you're going to say maybe start the September 12th, because they're also talking about maybe you push the start of the season out a little bit, in which case the workouts would be pushed out a little bit. So they need to get this figured out quickly. I don't know if they work on the weekends. They're not sports writers, but they need to figure out the schedule as soon as possible. That way teams know when they can start working out and proceed from there.
Yeah, I think people need to understand that we're humans, we're emotional, and for those people that are not necessarily logical and look and see what the situation is, when it doesn't affect you or anybody you know, then it's just something that's in the news. As soon as it touches somebody that you know or you personally, then it becomes the most important and severe thing in the world, of course. But let's take into account how many, when we talk 1% of the population, that's a lot of people. It seems minuscule, but it's a lot of people. Do you know 100 people? Anybody watching, do you know 100 people? Do you know 500 people? I think we all know more than that. And so we're talking about most likely it affecting handfuls of people that we know or their loved ones, certainly. Steve, you touched upon something in regards to how this would affect 2021 or a spring season being put on the table. And I thought Urban Meyer had a great rundown of how he sees the possibilities, which he considers zero of a spring season, in asking college football players to put in all those reps, get beat up during the spring. And he had a really good breakdown. And the first time I've ever heard out of his mouth the 1,000 rep rule in regards to how he treats veteran players in spring practice that have at least 1 year starting experience and especially 2 and 3 years of starting experience, and how he backs them off. Because he knows that they've proven that they can play, they know the system, and I'm not beating these guys up anymore because they've had X number of reps, and that he keeps track, his staff keeps track of the number of reps over the cumulative career, and that he's only sending those kids out there maybe 3 out of 5 sessions a week, and he just doesn't see how that's possible to expect those kids to be able to turn around in X number of weeks and play another college football season, even if the first one's truncated.
Well, yeah, the wear and tear of the season alone, as it's played in the fall, I mean, there's a lot of guys from Ohio State who weren't lined up to practice in the spring because they had to have maintenance surgeries at the end of after the bowl game, just to get them back where they need to be ready to go for the fall of 2020. So what you're talking about is playing some kind of a season, maybe an 8-10 game season, whatever it is, in the spring, and then maybe a championship decided after that, and then taking 3 months off and starting over again. I don't know. I just don't know how that happens. Maybe you widen the roster and make it 90 scholarship guys or something. I don't know. Just thinking out loud, because you're going to need more bodies is the problem. And as I alluded to earlier, what incentive is there for Justin Fields if, or Sunshine Trevor Lawrence, if one of them's the number 1 player, number 2 player locked for the NFL draft, whether they play another down of college football or not, to break their leg playing, on a snowy field in March, and hope, that they're still going to get drafted in the first round. I think they have to question that. So, yeah, I'm interested to see what direction this takes, and I kind of agree with Urban. I just think it's a non-starter to think that they would play in February, March, April.
Gene said it was like the last resort. If obviously they're going to try to play the season, and then they would look at that. They haven't really discussed it that much in depth. I know Urban, the year Ohio State won a national title, said there was no way they could have played another game after that because they had already played too many. And he is given to hyperbole, but you almost believe it, playing 15 games the way they did there at the end. But yeah, I mean, he's been that 2,000 rep club has been something he has trumpeted. We've all heard it for years and talked to players about it. And back at Florida, he had the circle of trust or whatever, where guys would get breaks and stuff. At Ohio State, it was just, there's no reason for Joey Bosa to continue to abuse this freshman left tackle. He started as a freshman. He started as a sophomore. He doesn't need to be out here, for 2 hours on a spring Tuesday. He can just, get a couple of reps here and there, and it helps the younger guys get ready as well.
Yeah, you either have to play the season now, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to start September 5th. You could push it back to October. Maybe you're truncating the season even a little bit more, but you play it in the fall or you don't play it at all. Spring is not going to work. I've been a big opponent of that since, Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma started talking about it, and some national columnists have really started carrying that banner. It's a foolish notion. It's not good for the welfare of the players. And, you can't sit there and say, well, what about the players? And then you put them in we don't know how COVID is going to react or anything, herd immunity or whatnot. What we do know is having them play a 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 game season, tell them they get 10 days off, and then get your butts back in the weight room to get ready for the next season. We know what the result of that is, and that's going to be a lot of injuries and things that are not good for the welfare for these players. So play it in fall or don't play it at all. And I need a paycheck, so let's play it in fall because I need some football.
The NCAA's chief medical officer last week was on a podcast with Andy Katz and the Pac-12 commissioner, and the subject of spring football was brought up, and he's like, we don't know that spring is going to be any better. What we do know now is we are preparing to play now. So why would we put off what we are preparing for now for something that may be no chance of happening anyway? And I'm with Kevin that the national media that is always trumpeting the players' safety and rights and wanting to play in spring, you're asking them to do something that 2 seasons in 1 year. How is that safer for the players? And I understand that we wouldn't see Justin Fields or anything like that. I don't know that that's the biggest drawback, because the best thing about college football is the way new players emerge. That's my favorite thing about it. So I don't know that that's necessarily the biggest thing. Sure, it wouldn't be any fun. It would be less fun not to have Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields out there. But there's the safety of the players. If that's gonna matter, you can't have them play 2 seasons in 1 calendar year, and not just 1 calendar year, like it's in 10, 11 months.
There are 2 huge forces at odds here, and that would be health and money. For the football fan, it's just watching football. They're not involved in the money, of course, and could care less. They just want to watch football. But I think the Big Ten is taking a huge stand here, and I think it really underlines, to everyone's point here on the panel, the severity of the situation. If the Big Ten plays big boy football. So it's one thing when the Ivy League came out, because they're basically saving money by canceling their sports season, and it's just a completely different deal. It's not the financial consideration by any stretch. When the Big Ten comes out and says, we're not going to play Ohio State and Oregon, Michigan, Washington, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, on down the line, and sacrifice all that money, that we could be a few bad declines or upgrades in the curve, however you want to look at it, from really compromising the actual season in its totality. Cheryl had asked, and then she jumped back into the chat and wanted to know if we answered her question. And I think I'm pinpointing the proper question from Cheryl. I got to think that this is a very minor consideration at this point, but whether there would be recruits at the games.
If you're trying to create a bubble, why would you bring other people into the bubble? I know. I mean, we just really need to write this class off in terms of it's going to be unique circumstances, and I know that maybe just even 2 weeks ago or whatnot, I probably was on here saying, oh, maybe October or whatever, and then things kind of changed, and I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't have visits the rest of the way. It wouldn't surprise me. I don't think things are going to suddenly be better in January once, we're not playing football one way or the other. I don't think things are going to be any better at that point. No, I don't think we see recruits there. I don't know to what level we'll see fans in the stands. Maybe if we are at a point to where under, as Gene said, CDC guidelines or whatever, and we're getting about 1/5 capacity or whatnot. I mean, maybe you can have a situation to where you're putting recruits up in like C-Deck or something, but how are you going to bring them around the team? I mean, so much of the visit is about, oh, I want to get to know the guys or whatnot. And, you have, Johnny Football Star from wherever coming in, and he has a bit of a headache and doesn't think much of it. And then suddenly you have 13 guys on the DL because they got the Rona. That's just a bad situation.
And I think what happens if you've got like a kid who's going to commit to Michigan but doesn't and knows he has the COVID-19 and says, I want to take a trip to Ohio State, intentionally infects the entire Buckeye squad, and then commits to Michigan.
That'd be the ultimate
over for years.
That'd be the ultimate Trojan horse, I would say. I just feel the rules are going to be the same for everybody. So impact recruiting is a relative term because if it's impact, if Michigan State is operating under the same restrictions Ohio State is, then by default, their recruiting has been affected the same way Ohio State's has been affected. Nobody can go to their campus. Nobody can press flesh with their coaches. Nobody can come in for an official visit and get wined and dined and all that. So if the rules are the same and everybody has to abide by them, it's kind of a nil impact across the board, really.
The interesting situation could be if this grows worse in certain parts of the country and not others, and the process and approach and thought process is different in certain conferences. So we come to a situation and a conclusion in which a conference or two conferences shut down. I'm talking about out of the Power Five, what the impact or ramifications could be for the next season. Because on one hand, and even beyond that, because on one hand, you would think it would negatively impact not playing football, losing all that money, recruiting, all that other sort of thing. But then if it goes sour for whomever stays on the field, then it's a looked on as a good move and a safe move, and eventually the right side of history to be canceling a season if it goes bad for those teams and those conferences that elect to play to the conclusion regardless.
Well, I think that's why Gene also talked about maybe only pre-scheduling 5 games and then seeing how things are going. And that's why you want the flexibility. I saw somebody earlier ask, does that mean the schedule is going to change the Rutgers? Will Ohio State still open with Rutgers? And I'm not sure if Kevin and I fully answered that, but don't expect the schedule that you see in front of you now to be the schedule that Ohio State plays. I wrote today, like, everything you knew about the 2020 Ohio State football schedule, just throw it out. And Gene said they'll use that as a guide and try to keep those same teams. But now you've got more dates to work with. Figure the bye week and the 3 games that you've canceled, you've got those 3 weeks. You've got possibly week 0. So there's just a lot of different areas that you can move games. So I would throw out the 2020 schedule for Ohio State and the rest of the Big Ten. I think it's worthless right now.
This is what we do each and every week, typically on a Friday, but that's one of the reasons why you need to subscribe to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. You turn on the bell, you get the notifications and know when we go live, in particular with Ohio State football talk with Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Scoop. You got Kevin Noon down below me from Buckeye Grove and Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts on 247 Sports below Tony. This is the Big 4 box. This is the way we like it. I like when we got all 3 on. This is about as good as it gets, folks. So I hope you appreciate the Ohio State football talk. Can you guys envision anything? I know out of the gate we discussed how the college football playoff is way off in the future, can't be determined. Who knows how it's going to lay out? Some teams could play 7 conference games and some 10. I'm talking across the country. But is there any thought about how the college football playoff selection could, because somebody made the suggestion to me yesterday that it would need to be expanded if everybody, let's say what the Big Ten has put in play, goes across the Power 5, everybody just stays within conference, plays a conference season. Well, it would only make sense in terms of fairness to include all 5 conference champs, because you can't make any comparison between the 5 conference champions. But we know, as Kevin pointed out in particular, whatever football we get and whatever championship conclusion we should all be satisfied with to a certain extent. But there was some calls that I took, people wanting to play this into some kind of expanded playoff. And I said, well, we're actually in a situation where we're limiting the travel, limiting the football, limiting the exposure. I can't imagine that they would expand the playoff, even though that would be the most fair thing to do.
The first thing that comes to my mind is, where are we with coronavirus at the end of November and early December, when a theoretical playoff field and theoretical bowl games would be set? Have we quelled this to where it is manageable and is now safe to move about the country with a traveling party of 300 people and have fans? So many questions are left unanswered here, and people are being very critical of our political leaders, our school leaders, university leaders, and everybody else, because the story changes every 20 minutes. I wouldn't want to be in any of these people's shoes, because you don't know what's lurking around the corner. I'm a firm believer we need to go on with our lives and we need to take the proper precautions. I don't want it, so I'll take care of me, and I'll try and prevent myself and my family from getting it. But at the same time, I do believe, kids should be in school. We need to go on with life to a degree, but will it be safe? And thinking about a postseason, it could be a situation where if this thing hasn't quelled down at all, they just say there's no postseason this year, there's no bowl games, just vote on it with an AP poll, and they'll be declared, this year's, or a coach's poll, they'll be declared this year's national champions, and that'll be that. And it'll be controversial, but it is entirely possible in my mind that, if we as a society don't rein this in, that they wouldn't have bowl games this year. And particularly if you can't have people come to the games and travel to New Orleans and Pasadena to see these games in person, I know it's TV product and everything, but I don't know. It you leave a lot of money on the table by not having the playoff. We know that. So again, maybe that's a last resort, that they're going to do everything they can to preserve the 3 playoff games. And maybe there's no other bowl games this year. Maybe the only bowl games are played by the 4 playoff teams. And, if that's how it is, that's how it is. But I think it's completely, premature to know or believe anything is going to happen at this point, given how things change every 20 minutes right now.
I wanted to jump in real quick and say that I'm glad some things never change. The world may be in turmoil right now, and we're already concerned that we're going to have 5 undefeated teams at the end. I mean, that's always par for the course. There's going to be separation. I mean, things aren't going to be equal. And I'm not going to pick on this conference or that, because I know Mark brings in a wide swath of fans, and I don't get 30 DMs from people about how I hate their conference or whatever, but it'll sort itself out. But here's my proposal for the CFP, is where you sit there and you just create your bubble, and the way that we're seeing the NBA or the NHL or whatever, and you do a Friday night, Saturday night semifinals on back-to-back nights. The 2 losers go home. The 2 winners stay another week, prepare, and you play the game the following week. That way you can limit their exposure to who they're coming into contact with. No, we're not going to see players at Harrah's in New Orleans, at the craps table all night or whatnot. But if we're going to get there and play this in the winter, when they're concerned that everybody's freaking out that this is much more severe during cold weather than warm weather, you're going to have to kind of lock it down. And I do agree with Steve in an instance that I don't know how you have a bunch of other bowl games. I mean, maybe you have your New Year's 6 or something. I don't know. But the Pool and Weed Eater Bowl and the Duke's Mayonnaise Bowl and things like that, I don't see them happening this year unless we have some serious either medical breakthroughs or changes in opinions of life with COVID in our society.
Noon, are you suggesting that there's a possibility that we could spend 2 weeks in New Orleans covering a football team?
I don't know if I will. I'll go bankrupt before that happens. But
no,
we may or may not have. We don't know what media policies are going to be at this point.
But if there is just a vote on a national title, this is what you should have right after that team name. Put the asterisk next to that team name. We have learned to do so many different things, and things have changed so much for us with this pandemic. Industries are learning how to work at home. We're learning to adapt. Maybe, as Noon said, maybe this is now the time to adapt and expand a playoff. It would require some extreme things, but we are learning how to do that. Kids don't need to be in classes for, at least college kids. Regular kids should still be in classes because Lord knows I've seen how people try to teach their own kids and it don't work. But the college kids, with all of the support they have, if they're in a bubble for 2 weeks playing a couple of games, I don't think that's the end of the world. They're going to be in classes. If classes are even ongoing, there's going to be a break, semester breaks at some point there. We are adapting right now. Maybe this is another adaptation we can make because we know we're going to go to 8 teams eventually in the playoffs. Maybe you just pull the Band-Aid off and do it this year. May not be the best year to do it because, Mark, as you said, do you really want all of these teams to be traveling? But, we're learning how to do things in a different way now. And maybe this is also a time where the sport could use some monetary infusion, and a couple extra playoff games would certainly do that.
Yeah, David Greenshield brings up the financial aspect here about if those bowl games are lost. I just read Indiana provided their financial report on the Gator Bowl. They brought in $3 million and they spent exactly $3 million. They didn't make any money. They didn't lose any money on going to the Gator Bowl. I think it was like 2.5, something like that. They broke it down line by line: travel, food, hotel, had to buy $90,000 worth of game tickets, etc. So when we say lose money on bowls, the only bowls that pay the colleges are the New Year's Six. You break even on everything else. Maybe you make a few extra dollars on the Capital One Citrus Bowl or the Outback Bowl, just because those are more prime TV spots than the rest of them. But even then, they've been cannibalized because they now play a New Year's Six game up against it at noon on New Year's Day. So, there are bowls that where schools make money, and then there are bowls where schools just play in it and hope to break even. And that's even been a struggle over the years, as we all know. They make so much money off the playoff that that everybody does make some money off the playoff, which is good, or the New Year's Six, I suppose, that entire format. Regarding the small schools, I agree. And maybe Tony has something here where if they go to an 8-team playoff, they can subsidize the MAC and some of these other places with at least a few dollars to kind of keep them running to get them to 2021 when theoretically you need them again. We say they don't need to buy out games or whatever, but that buyout game where they pay Buffalo $1.5 million to come in and get drubbed 44-10, they make about $8 million on that. So, it's still vital part of if you have 100,000 people there. So, this year with nobody in the stands, theoretically, or small crowd, right now it sounds like there'll be nobody in the stands at any of these games unless something drastically changes. That's why they canceled those games, obviously. Maybe an 18 playoff, as Tony said, would provide a few dollars for some of the group of 5 conferences in those schools.
Bye, Rick. Thank you so much for the Super Chat contribution. Everybody, thank you so much for your contributions to the live chat as well. I went on a 7 or 8 minute rant about Notre Dame. That's posted here, so I will serve it up to you three in regards to the immediate thought was, okay, the Big Ten, the first shoe has fallen. This is a major deal. If they're canceling non-conference games, then the ACC followed in line. boom. Okay. How does this impact Notre Dame? And can Notre Dame, and of course, we'll include all the independents, but everyone gravitates to Notre Dame first and foremost because of the obvious. They're a major player in this whole thing. So any thoughts out there about the Notre Dame situation involving the ACC and their agreement that involves participation in 5 and now 6 games this fall, but no direct tie to the conference and playing for a championship in the ACC?
Well, I know Kevin shared a link with us saying that a couple of reports that Notre Dame will be fine and the ACC will work to make sure Notre Dame is complete. However Notre Dame wishes to be treated, they will be exactly the exalted Notre Dame. ACC will do whatever they can for them, which is, it tells you everything you need to know about the ACC right there. This is an opportunity where the ACC holds the cards and they're letting Notre Dame, do you want any of these? They're playing like Go Fish and they're showing Notre Dame their cards. Which ones of these would you like? And Notre Dame, we'll take a Wake Forest. We'll take Syracuse. We'll take a Syracuse. And to me, this is a place where if the ACC was smart, they would get firm with Notre Dame and give them an ultimatum. And clearly, the ACC does not think much of themselves.
Well,
set Notre Dame adrift. To hell with those guys.
Well, I think it's a two-way street. I think Notre Dame does have a sweetheart deal that they were able to put baseball, basketball teams, et cetera, into the ACC and give those programs a home. They get all the good and none of the bad. Basically, they have their own contract with NBC for their 6 or 7 games on television every year. But the two-way street of that is with the ACC network, the ESPN contract, ABC contract with ACC. They can put 3 or 4 Notre Dame games on in their contract and make some money off of that. And believe me, with those broadcasters, ESPN and ABC, when they get their hands on Notre Dame, they love it. And I'm not a TV ratings recruitnik to know, is it worth an extra ratings point to have a Notre Dame game on? I don't know. It might, maybe when they're good, it does, but when they're 5-5, some of these years like they've been, maybe not. But I just think that that provides value for the ACC to do it this way, or they would not have done it. So it's a two-way street. They're a conference partner with the ACC, and they're not going to abandon them just because of this situation. I guarantee you, they crafted that deal, and there's been no movement to get rid of that deal. I think, you put yourself in Wake Forest shoes, or what's a good example? NC State. And
pretty much the whole conference is a good example, Steve.
I know. Well, everybody but Clemson. But what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to say is, to have Notre Dame on your home schedule, you're able to maybe sell a few more tickets, maybe juke the price of those tickets up a little bit sometimes. So that's been, a way to get more people to renew their season tickets, is to know, okay, you buy your ticket for 2020, you'll be on the list for 2021 when we have Notre Dame coming here. So, and believe me, some of that marketing does go on. So just a thought, but I think it's a two-way street. Otherwise, ACC wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the deal was struck because it benefited both sides. But at the same time, in my eyes, and I believe in most of college football nation, there's lost credibility and respect for a conference as a football conference when it allows a team to just participate but not play for a championship and join your conference in every other sport. It basically makes a huge statement, as Tony started the discussion with, of what you think of yourself and the self-respect you have for yourself as a football conference when you allow a team just to participate as this quasi-member, but they don't compete for a championship and they do their own thing and allow themselves in whatever aspects to want to do their own thing, but you benefit financially. So you're kind of bowing to their wants and desires for the financial payoff.
The ACC is letting Notre Dame date its wife.
We could have saved the conversation and just let that comment stand on its own. There it is. Tony, I needed you about 7 hours ago to cut my video. I ranted for 8 minutes about the deal. All right. Really good stuff from all of you, as always, here on our Ohio State Live show that we bring you each and every week, typically on a Friday, but that's why you subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications, and I will leave it wide open. Anything else?
I got one thing.
Sure.
Mark, real quick. I won't keep everybody long. I know everybody's very busy. Somebody asked what happens if the season gets canceled to the scholarship players. And based on the other sports, those players can come back and wouldn't count against the cap. But what happens is, do the schools want to pay for those? We saw Wisconsin decline to bring players back, and football is very expensive. And you're talking about maybe bringing an extra 20 guys back. There could be some very, very unfair roster sizes, compared to, like, Ohio State could have 10 scholarship players next year, and Wisconsin may be at 85. So there are some things like that. If the season doesn't happen, where you're going to have some wildly different numbers, possibly because of schools bringing players back, the players who choose to come back, that is, because some schools will be able to afford more than other schools. So just something to keep in mind.
Folks, you get a taste, just a slice, a sliver of what these guys deliver on a daily basis at their particular sites. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop, Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove, and Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts on 247 Sports. We appreciate it, guys. It's always a great time and great information and insight from all of you. Have a great weekend.
Take care.
See you.